Well, good morning, and thank you very much. Thank you, distinguished ministers also, and of course, Vice Chancellor. I don't know if you're still here. Ladies and gentlemen, for having me here. It's really a pleasure also to be invited to say some words on behalf of Sida. Thank you also to Diffie for inviting us. Well, we are... Sweden has, as you said, Rob, for a number of years, since the late 80s, promoted support to the water sector, and we work today in about 14 countries bilaterally, including Kenya, Bangladesh, and to some degree in Ethiopia as well. We work at the global level with institutions like UNICEF, and the World Bank, of course, the Global Sanitation Fund.
Is the sound okay at the back? Can you hear at the back?
Maybe I need to get closer to this
yes,
a bit.
Okay.
In the realm of scientific research cooperation, we haven't worked per se on water issues. We don't call it water issues, but since about 40 years ago, actually, since Sida Sweden started our support to scientific research cooperation, we have been quite important actors supporting organizations such as the CGIR, IDDRB in Bangladesh. We support quite a number of programs that have scientific research cooperation with regards, and they cut across the water sector. And in that, on Monday next week, we are celebrating our 40 years with our Sida Science Day. And one of the key aspects in that, that we have been able to see in this work is this long-term commitment to supporting scientific knowledge and the ownership of the research. In that regard, I want to say that for us, research cooperation has not, as I said, it has not had this specific focus on water, but it has been key in terms of bringing up the knowledge in different research centers around the world. And one of the things that we've seen also is this catalytic momentum that research support has created in terms of producing new policies and producing results that are bringing benefits to the poor around the world. And in the case, for example, about the ICDDRB, which also receives support from DFID, we have seen that this long-term support over a number of years has provided the platforms to start the development of vaccines, for example. And there we have come in with different innovative approaches in terms of not just the innovation, but of financing mechanisms, of finding different types of support through loans and guarantees or such things. Some of the key lessons that we've learned over the past years, we have many lessons, and working with results-based management, with results frameworks within research cooperation has been really key. It's something we did not do from the beginning, and we've been implementing it more and more over the past 6 years. And I think looking at the REACH program is something that it's very difficult sometimes, but having these specific targets does allow the research to move forward, and having targets also with partnerships, it allows everybody to follow these specific keys. Another key issue has been supporting platforms or universities or research centers and to create environments that are conducive to doing research. And in that regard is that at national level, you have to have policies that allow the researchers to do the research, to have access to labs, to have access to libraries, to scientific journals, to publications. And there we also have some support to institutions like INASP, the International Network for the Advancement of Scientific Publications, which I think DFID also supports, and that allows the researchers to actually have the access to journals, and also support to research being translated for policymakers. So how do you write the research so that everybody can understand it and read it? Another aspect on how to reach the policymakers or the private sector has also been through establishing early partnerships. So we've worked for a number of years with something called the triple helix model, with the support of the Swedish innovation agency, where with the research that we have identified in different countries, we've asked Vinnova, so the Swedish Agency for Innovation, to come in also to provide support to these different research hubs in moving the research results further into production of specific products. And we have fantastic examples. One is actually based in Kenya, is the BioInnovate Center, and it's research within biological biotechnology for water security, for farming, and I can highly recommend looking at those structures. We at Sida we define innovation as the use of knowledge, ideas, technologies, and process that go into products, and also into procedures and services that bring added value, always looking at inclusive innovation, so thinking of the needs of the poor. In that sense, I just want to end by saying that a common view that we have is that for innovation to occur, you need this interaction between researchers, the private sector, civil society, and of course political bodies that are interested in supporting that, along with effective communication. These are among the key factors that we have seen that have really moved some of this research into productive either materials or services or systems of innovation. An issue that I think is worth mentioning here is also the need to support the creation of patents at the local level, national patent systems. I know that the African Union has been looking quite a lot into that, and it's highly important because this ownership of the science has to also be somehow owned and commercialized, and often it has been something that we have struggled, and we are still supporting a number of organizations. We're working very closely with UNESCO Science, and this is an area that we are in quite a lot of discussions with them. And also with the National Ministries of Science and Technology and Innovation. And I just want to leave you with a last thought on the context of innovation. We think that donor money can, of course, speed up the process of research and innovation, but the donor money, they cannot replace the initiative, the energy, the creativity, the commitment that must be in place for innovation to thrive and for the seeds of prosperity to grow. This takes time, and of course, 7 years is a good starting point, and we congratulate you and we look forward to following it, the whole RICH program.
One of the wider impacts of what we're trying to achieve is collectively across the portfolio of universities and academic partners is to increase the capacity, particularly in Africa and Asia, of universities to be global hubs in water security going forward. It's a very ambitious goal, and there's a lot of structural constraints to that, as our partners in the room will be the first to recognize. But it's something, I think, for policy and programs going forward. You need the capacity within country that can move this forward. It's something that Oxford and others will no doubt contribute in the future, but understanding the pathways to achieve that through innovation, through partnerships, and this triple helix model where you look at academia with government and enterprise, how that can look at novel ways going forward. And I think this sort of neatly links into the Sustainable Development Goals that we're now announced, the new global goals that Charlotte spoke to before, and UNICEF's very important role within this in terms of championing and thinking through new ways forward for those, and maybe ask Sanjay to reflect on a couple of those points.
At the start of the year, the World Economic Forum identified water as the risk with the highest potential impact. on economic growth and performance. So these are people who understand what risk is, and it is all about managing risk and being informed about risk in order to address the kind of issues that we all feel passionately about. So I'll just deal with a little bit about why it's important for UNICEF, not kind of to be inward-looking, but I think because it helps at least to clarify some of the issues and then link up with the SDGs. So there are three basic reasons that I can think of why it's fundamental to our mission and mandate around the rights of children. And the first is because it affects children. So we, or others estimate, and we believe that in the 90s, about 66 million children every year were affected by climate-related disasters. But also there are kind of multiple deprivations and layers of hazard and vulnerability that are superimposed. So about 50 million children live in areas that are, on the one hand, severely drought affected, or the risk of drought is very severe, and at the same time where about half the population fall below the poverty threshold. So you can imagine the vulnerability there. Similarly, about 300 million children live in areas that are where there is very high risk of recurrent flooding, and again, where half the population is below the poverty threshold. So these are fundamental vulnerabilities that are there that we have to understand, and that really put these children in unacceptable situations just by virtue of where they are, where they were born. The second issue is the role that we kind of have the privilege of playing with governments, and thank you, honourable ministers, for making reference to some of that. We are partners of government. We work very closely with governments. We have, and quite often I tell our people on the ground, and we have about 570 WASH professionals across about 100 countries, and for me, it's not the kind of the funding that they deploy that is important, but it is their ability to work with government as advisors, confidants, colleagues, in providing access to knowledge, in helping connect governments to the knowledge, expertise, experience that they need. And I think that is what we seek to bring, and we're in a privileged position to be able to do it, as with many others. And as such, I think we have an obligation to deal with the changing contexts and programming environments. And again, the relationships between water security and the risks to achieving children's rights are quite fundamental there. And then the third element is the humanitarian development continuum. And we work in both areas, but it really does pain me to see. I mean, our budget on water, sanitation and hygiene is roughly split 50-50 between humanitarian and development. And that's a really bad use of money, in the sense of we are dealing with emergencies because of the failure of development, if you like. And increasingly that is a continuum, and we can see that, and we can see the events that unfold from places like Syria that have such huge ramifications and consume huge amounts of money. Certainly dealing with the refugee crisis, just working through the unit costs and so on, quite apart from the fundamental human misery of it, really does bring home what I would call is a very poor value for money proposition, Obviously, it is life-saving, and we have to do it, and we have international obligations. But there are certainly much better ways, I think, of dealing with it. So the SDGs recognize these elements, and the set of kind of interconnected goals that are universal in their application, and we've seen examples of how interconnected the world is and how the SDGs, unlike the MDG agenda, which was very focused on aid and on a subset of countries, the SDG agenda transcends that. It is a member state-led agenda, and the universality elements of it, that it's for everyone, play really well into this agenda, or make this very key. In addition to the inequalities, I mean, one of the kind of strands running to the SDGs is the need to deal with inequalities and the poorest and most vulnerable. And the evidence does show us that dealing with, or certainly dealing in the way that we did with the MDGs, in terms of kind of a broad frontal assault on these issues, are not going to work any longer, that we do have to focus on the poorest and most vulnerable. And that's also where the biggest kind of, again, the biggest value proposition is in terms of lifting people out of poverty and making countries fulfill their full potential. So for us, it's really important that our programming is based on a really good understanding of these issues, the hazards, the vulnerabilities, and the risks that children and the poorest people face, and that they address the very drivers of these vulnerabilities and these risks, and that the ultimate aim is to kind of build the resilience of, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's services, and perhaps most importantly, institutions, the resilience of those institutions to adapt to contexts that are changing incredibly fast. And in order to do that, and that is why we have, we engage with REACH and with such enthusiasm, is that in order to do that, we do need to build the evidence base for action. We do need to build the capacity of institutions in countries, and it does, again, one of my kind of striking, it's not a memory because it's quite recurrent, is when I sit down with ministers, and it's not ministers from be it the Philippines or Indonesia, and we put a piece of evidence and analysis in front of them, and quite often they say, well, I wish I had the capacity to do that analysis, and that completely bowls me over, because I think that is completely wrong. It is much more impactful if countries can do their own analysis based on their own data to inform their own policies, and finally, to the test of this this partnership is that there is uptake in policy and practice, and that is really what we look forward to achieving with you. So, great. Thank you.
I think there's many points you've raised that I think that play into the REACH program. One of the fundamental ones is this idea of a science practitioner partnership, where the University of Oxford and other colleagues work with UNICEF, work with governments to try and address these issues, understand them, and provide the right evidence in the right way to the right people, so we can influence the change going forward. I think one of the other elements that I think we're going to invite Ruth now to speak to is the institutional fabric around this, how we can strengthen it through capacity and understandings, so the sort of investments that we may make in infrastructure has the right sequencing and coordination with institutions to deliver those services over the long term.
Well, thank you. Your Excellencies, colleagues in the REACH program, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a real privilege to represent IFPRI in this partnership at this launch meeting and to just hear how these different pieces fit together. I was asked to highlight one of the ins, the institution side. I think very often there is a tendency to focus on the technology or infrastructure, the pipes and dikes, if you like, which are the most obvious, and sometimes it's difficult to see the institutions. So that's why I begged the indulgence to put up a slide to make things visible. Also, by this point, you've been hearing a lot of words, and I thought something might help wake people up. First of all, the technology alone will not deliver water security. It won't deliver water even, but it's certainly not water security. That does require that partnership with institutions. But institutions is one of those really vague words, and a lot of people don't even really know what it means. When I'm referring to it, I'm referring to what's often called the rules of the game in society that guide human action and guide behavior. That can be formal institutions such as your ministries or the executing agencies, the irrigation department. They can be the informal institutions, the cooperation groups among farmers or small groups, or they can be even the social norms that are unwritten, but that really guide a lot, whether we're talking about water and sanitation behavior, up through how people share resources that they have. Now, what I did is adapted a framework that we've used a lot in agriculture and natural resource management, a framework that I've used to show why institutions are important for, say, adoption of climate-smart agriculture. But I had adapted this to put in some more of the kinds of investments that we're talking about for water security. Now, on this framework, on the horizontal scale, you have the time scale from short term, within a season, say, to long term, might be over generations. And the spatial scale, from the household to the community to the national to the global scale. Now, in that bottom corner, I put down, say, rainwater harvesting. You can get the returns in relatively quickly, and you can do it within a household. So that's fairly easy. The minute you're talking about longer term things, like putting in a latrine or certainly a toilet or a well, then those without tenure security, without property rights, are often excluded. So you need to start paying attention to property rights. And this is one of the issues, for example, in access to water and sanitation systems in slums. Property rights become important. Moving up the spatial scale, even within that bottom level, the household institutions are important in terms of, for example, in India, where I grew up, there's a big movement about whether or not the household will invest in a toilet. There's a campaign called No Loo, No I Do, as in people won't marry into households that do not provide a toilet. But these intra-household issues are important. But as you move up the spatial scale, you need more and more cooperation and coordination. The thing about water is that it connects people and it connects land and spatial areas, whether it's in water quantity or water quality. So you have to have coordination to authorize investments, to construct them, to operate them, to mobilize and spend resources, to decide how you're going to allocate and distribute the resources that are provided through these investments, and a lot on information, sharing information, and that's also very important for water security. We heard yesterday about predictions of floods and things like that. Now, if you'll see on this graph, most of the kinds of things that we're talking about are requiring these coordination institutions. At lower levels, collective action institutions generally have the advantage, the comparative advantage. The government is not terribly effective at, or it's quite expensive for government agents to coordinate everything in a group of 4 to 5 households. But there may still be important provisions on government policy that are relevant. At higher levels, state institutions become more important, but there can still be important roles for collective action and collective voice. Market institutions can also provide coordination at different places there. And at the global level, we also need very important institutions dealing with climate change, for example. Now, what's a key aspect of this that I hope our REACH program will address is not only to look at what are the institutions behind each of these types of water security, but who's included and who's excluded from them. And we already heard, for example, in Kenya, the government explicit provisions about inclusion of marginalized groups in state institutions. We need to look at, by gender, are women's voices and women's needs being represented in the various institutions that are making decisions about water security. For water supply and sanitation, are men's voices, or are men being included in that? By livelihood group, fishers and pastoralists are often left out of decision-making about water resources, where they may be focusing more on farmers. And are different people with different knowledge systems included? Because I think one of the things we really do need to do is not only emphasize the formally educated, the Oxford educated, if you will, but also local knowledge, which it also has very great importance for delivering water security. Whether that is knowledge of the norms and behavior or of the biophysical systems. So to bring this back to the 3 I's, I think we need also to invest not only in infrastructure, but in institutions. The problem is that very often, when we talk about investment in institutions, people have bandied around the term social engineering. I think that's fundamentally the wrong analogy. You can't engineer institutions very effectively, but you can help to shape them in certain ways toward greater equity. And perhaps the better analogy is gardening. When you're gardening, not everything is perfectly predictive, but you can guide things in certain directions if you have an understanding of the ground you're growing in, which in this case would be the cultural institutions, as well as the inputs that you're bringing in from outside. So I hope that in this REACH project we can really bring these pieces together so that it delivers for women as well as men, for different ethnic groups, for different livelihood groups, and really for the poor. Thank you.
Ruth, thank you very much indeed.